They say the woods around Hargrave County never truly go quiet. Even on windless nights, when the moon sits low and the air feels thick, there's a sound beneath the silence, something like breathing. Locals call it the memory of 1975, because that was the year the Hargraves children were found, and the year the entire county learned what a family secret really means. The story begins like a photograph left too long in the sun, edges fading, faces half forgotten. The Hargraves weren't famous, they weren't rich. They were just another farming family clinging to a dying patch of land at the edge of Missouri's forgotten woods. The father, Joseph Hargrave, was a veteran who came home from Vietnam quieter than when he left. The mother, Eileen, taught Sunday school, always in pressed dresses and a smile that looked painted on. They had 3 children, Abby, the oldest at 12, twins Luke and Sarah, 8 years old. Hello everyone, before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. On the morning of October 17th, 1975, the Hargraves pickup truck was found still running at the edge of their property. The door was open, a loaf of bread sat on the passenger seat, but no one was inside, no footprints in the dirt, no struggle. It was as though the family had simply stepped out of existence. For 3 days, search teams combed the woods. They found the family dog first, lying by the creek, alive but trembling, with something in its mouth. A small hand-carved wooden cross. The same kind Joseph used to whittle in the evenings, sitting by the fire, saying nothing. When they finally found the children, it wasn't far from the house. Huddled together in a shallow hollow beneath an old oak tree. They weren't hurt. Not at first glance. Their faces were pale, their eyes open, their hands clasped like they'd been praying. But there was no sign of Joseph or Eileen. Just the children and 3 words carved into the tree above them. "Forgive us, Father." The sheriff at the time, Walter Doone, closed the area for nearly a week. Reporters who came to cover the story were turned away. The official record said only one thing: Hargrave family, missing persons recovered, ongoing investigation. But the investigation never came. The county went quiet again, and the people who lived there learned not to ask questions about the Hargraves after dark, because every family hides something. The difference is, the Hargraves buried theirs too close to the surface. In small towns like Hargrave County, stories don't disappear, they ferment. They sink into the soil, the riverbeds, the grain of every farmhouse door. And over time, what began as whispers about a missing family began to twist into something else. The official record said the children were found, yet no one, not even the sheriff's deputy, could remember seeing their bodies. Only the photographs, locked away in evidence that vanished a year later when the old courthouse burned to the ground. There's one thing, though, that never made it into the papers. A single witness. Her name was Ruth Merrill, a neighbor who lived a mile down the road. She was the one who'd called the sheriff that morning in October. She'd said she saw something strange, 3 figures walking along the ridge at dawn, barefoot, moving in a line like a procession. The smallest one was carrying something in both hands. When she shouted to them, they didn't look back. Ruth said later that she recognized Abby Hargrave's red nightgown fluttering in the wind. That same nightgown would later be found at the edge of the hollow, torn with ash embedded in the fabric, as though it had been burned and buried, then dug up again. The county coroner, a man named Lionel Beck, handled the children's examination personally. His notes, what little remains of them, described no visible injuries but evidence of extended exposure to cold and signs of acute fear. He wrote something else too, in a line that was crossed out in the official record but faintly visible beneath. Mouth stained with ash. Pupil dilation suggests final state consciousness. No one understood what he meant. Or maybe they did, and just chose to forget. By Christmas that year, the Hargrave farmhouse had been boarded up. Snow covered the windows, and the land grew silent again. People began to say the property was cursed, that anyone who went near it heard the sound of children praying from under the floorboards. Decades passed. The road to the Hargrave land was rerouted. The town changed names twice. But in the 1990s, during a flood that tore through the lower valley, the earth around that same oak tree split open, and what they found beneath it wasn't supposed to exist. The flood unearthed the oak's roots like veins under torn skin. A week after the water receded, a farmer found a half-buried wooden box caught against the tree. It wasn't large, about the size of a child's toy chest, but it was heavy, sealed with rusted nails and wrapped in oilcloth. The man, thinking it might contain valuables washed loose by the flood, pried it open right there in the mud. Inside were bones, small, delicate, incomplete. But what chilled him wasn't what he found, it was what he didn't. Each of the 3 skulls was missing its jaw, and carved into the inside of the box lid was a phrase in uneven letters. They sang too loud. The box was turned over to authorities, though no one could say which authorities. There are no official records of its existence. What remains are a few surviving photographs, grainy black and whites, that circulate quietly among collectors of forbidden Americana. In them, you can see the initials, HH, burned into one of the bones, as though someone had branded them long after death. The discovery revived the old legend, and once again, Hargrave County was forced to remember. Newspaper columnists called it Missouri's sleeping horror. Some said Joseph Hargrave had come back from Vietnam obsessed with purification rituals he'd seen in the jungle, rites involving the silence of children and the promise of absolution through sacrifice. Others whispered that Eileen was the true believer, the one who led the prayers at night when no one could see her eyes. But one piece of evidence suggests something different. During the flood recovery, workers also uncovered a small wooden icon in the mud, a crude carving of a man with no mouth and hands raised toward the sky. Etched beneath it was a date, October 16, 1975, one day before the Hargraves vanished. Some say the icon was part of a local sect that had briefly taken root in the 1970s, a cult that preached silence as divine language, claiming the voice was a corruption of grace. Members were told to keep their children from speaking during atonement season. The sect disappeared after only a few months, but its traces remained in burned meeting halls and old hymnals, and now, it seems, beneath that oak tree. By the time the farmer who found the box tried to tell his story, his house had burned down. No official cause, no one injured. But when investigators sifted through the ashes, they found something strange on his kitchen wall, a child's handprint, black with soot pressed over and over again. After the fire, Hargrave County began to eat itself from the inside. The locals stopped using the back roads that passed near the old property, and the children of the county were told, quietly, to never play in the fields past the Miller Bridge. The land had become a scar, and like all scars, it ached when it rained. The sheriff's office tried to dismiss the box, the bones, the carvings as a hoax. But those who'd been alive in 1975 didn't need convincing. They remembered the quiet funerals, the closed caskets, and the way the church bell rang 3 times that winter without anyone pulling the rope. Around this time, a man named Clarence Vale arrived in town. He claimed to be a historian researching post-war trauma in rural America, but his notes, later discovered in the archives of a nearby college, reveal something more personal. Vale had grown up in Hargrave County. He'd been Abby Hargrave's classmate in the 5th grade, and his uncle had served as one of the search volunteers the day the children were found. Vale's writings describe a memory that had haunted him for decades, the sound of humming in the woods that night. He said it wasn't music. It was monotone, rhythmic, like the recitation of a word that no one could quite hear. His uncle, he wrote, came home from that search with a small cut on his wrist and refused to speak for weeks afterward. When Vale asked him what they'd seen under the oak, his uncle said only one thing before he died: we shouldn't have answered them. The historian spent 2 years piecing together the fragments, church records, death certificates, even a handful of sermon notes from Eileen Hargrave's Sunday school class. In one of them, written just a week before the family vanished, she'd copied a passage from the book of Job, "And I am become like dust and ashes, mine eye hath seen thee." But beneath it, she'd added a line not found in any Bible: "The voice must end before the hearing begins." When Vale submitted his findings to a local paper in 1999, they declined to publish. 3 days later, he checked out of the motel where he'd been staying and was never seen again. The only thing left behind in his room was a cassette tape labeled October Hymn. No one knows what was on it, because the first person who tried to play it stopped the tape 30 seconds in, stood up, and quietly walked into traffic. In 2003, a new family bought what was left of the Hargrave property. The buyers were a couple from Kansas City. Mark and Dana Whitlow, with their 6-year-old son Peter. They said they wanted a place quiet enough to hear themselves think. The house had long been condemned, but the county was desperate to sell the land, and the Whitlows had the kind of money that made paperwork move faster. They tore down what was left of the farmhouse, cleared the brush, and planted a garden where the oak once stood. For a while, it seemed peaceful, but the quiet that had once kept the locals away found its way into their lives. Neighbors began to notice strange things. Dana hanging laundry at night while humming in a flat, broken rhythm. Mark digging holes in the yard, then filling them back in before sunrise. The boy, Peter, stopped speaking entirely. When teachers asked him questions, he'd only stare, then trace something into the desk with his finger. Always the same shape, a circle with 3 slashes through it. A year later, the Whitlows vanished, just like the Hargraves before them. But this time, the house wasn't empty. The sheriff's department found a letter nailed to the door. It read, "The soil is fed, the voice is gone." The property was seized by the state. No one has lived there since. But according to local accounts, hikers who stray too far from the county line sometimes find themselves near a patch of land where birds stop singing. One man swears he found a child's shoe half buried there. Another said he saw smoke rising from the ground though there was no fire. It's hard to know what's truth and what's fear, but even the new county maps refuse to mark the old Hargrave land. It's as though the earth itself decided to erase it. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you run from it or dig until you found the truth? Because truth, once unearthed, doesn't rest, it moves. It finds new names, new families, new voices to silence. And if you listen long enough, you might hear it whisper, soft, patient, waiting for your answer. By 2015, Hargrave County was a ghost of itself. The factories had closed, the schools had merged, and the river that once brought life to the valley now carried only silt and memory. But some stories refused to sink. That year, a team of documentary students from St. Louis University came to film what they called The Silence Beneath, Forgotten Rituals of the Midwest. They were young, confident, curious, and unprepared. The lead researcher, a woman named Lily Kent, managed to track down the last living member of the original search party from 1975. His name was Carl Boyd. He lived alone in a trailer just outside the county line, surrounded by boxes of old photographs, newspaper clippings, and tape recorders that didn't work anymore. When the students asked him about the Hargraves, Carl grew quiet. Then, almost reluctantly, he played them an old cassette. The label on it read simply, October Hymn Vales Tape, the one from the motel. The students recorded the playback on camera. You can find fragments of it online if you look hard enough, but only fragments. 30 seconds of indistinct static, then a faint melody. A child's voice humming out of tune before another sound drowns it out, something deep, like the echo of wind inside a hollow tree. Carl told them that was the last thing he heard before his brother disappeared in the flood of '92. The students never released their documentary. Their footage was seized after an anonymous tip claimed it contained prohibited material. But an uncut transcript of their field notes survived. In it, Lily wrote, "When we played the tape, I saw movement outside the window, small figures between the trees. Their mouths were open, but there was no sound." Weeks later, her team's van was found on Highway 34, doors open, engine running. Inside, the only thing recovered was a wooden carving of a man with no mouth. Beneath it, scratched into the floorboard, were 3 words, just like before, "Forgive us, Father." To this day, no one knows if the Hargraves were victims, believers, or something in between. But every 30 years, the floodwaters rise again, and the land around the old property begins to move. Locals say it's the soil breathing. Historians say it's groundwater pressure. But those who've been close enough to hear it know the truth. It isn't water. It's voices. Still praying. Still waiting. There's a saying in Hargrave County now, whispered mostly by the old-timers who still remember the smell of wet cedar and smoke. The soil keeps its promises. They say it like a warning, not a proverb. Because in that part of Missouri, time doesn't heal. It recycles. In 2021, a government development plan proposed turning the area into a wildlife reserve. The land surveyors sent to map the terrain lasted less than a week. Their official report says unstable ground conditions, but one of them, an intern named Ryan Cole, wrote something else in his personal notes. He described the ground as humming, said it felt like standing over an amplifier buried beneath the dirt. 2 months later, Ryan uploaded a single photo to an anonymous message board. It showed a cluster of trees bent inward, their roots exposed, almost forming a circle, and in the center, what looked like the outline of 3 small figures pressed into the soil, as though something beneath had tried to surface. The post was deleted within hours. His account was erased, but some people saved the image. If you know where to look, you can still find it, faded, grainy, but unmistakable. Maybe that's the true nature of the Hargraves story. It isn't about ghosts or curses or even religion. It's about inheritance, about the kind of silence that seeps through generations until someone, somewhere, finally breaks it. You see, the more you study this case, the more one thing becomes clear: the Hargraves didn't disappear. They transformed their voices into something else, something that doesn't die but listens. A living memory, a sermon buried in the earth. Every county in America has its own Hargraves, a family swallowed by secrecy, a place no one visits after dark, a prayer that was never meant to be answered. And sometimes when you drive past those forgotten roads, the air shifts. The static on your radio grows sharp. You think you hear a child's hum through the noise. Don't listen too long, because that's how it begins. That's how the soil remembers your name. And if one night you find yourself in Missouri, on a back road with no signal, and the wind starts to carry that same melody, the one they called the October hymn, don't stop the car. Don't look for where it's coming from. Just keep driving. The silence will follow you anyway.